Every culture, it faces this fundamental question. How do you protect who you are from a world that seems hostile? Do you build a fortress and seal yourself off? Or do you risk looking in the mirror the world holds up to you? Well, today we're going to dive into how that very conflict forged an entire school of modern Jewish thought, shaping some of its greatest minds, and, leading one of them to a profound crisis of faith. Okay, so our story kind of unfolds in 4 parts. We're going to start with that core conflict, the fortress and the mirror. Then we'll see this incredible attempt to build a perfect intellectual world. After that, we'll get into the crisis of the man who inherited that world, the lonely man of faith. And finally, we'll see how a new way forward was found by embracing the fragments. All right, let's jump right into that core conflict. This whole story, it revolves around this deep psychological battle for identity. So on one side, you've got the mirror. And what is that? It's the hostile, often totally twisted image of the Jew that gets projected by the outside world. It's a reflection that threatens to define you from the outside in. So what's the defense against that? Well, you build the fortress, a completely internal world made from Jewish law and text. The idea is to create a self-contained universe that's so strong that mirror just becomes irrelevant. There's actually a psychoanalytic term for this, the imaginary trap. It's that psychological pressure you feel when you're constantly being defined by somebody else's hostile gaze. It's a trap because any move you make can just be twisted to confirm their prejudice, and suddenly you're stuck in an identity that isn't even yours. So the way you fight this trap is by building the symbolic fortress. The whole idea is to create a world based on the internal logic of Jewish law, or halacha, and we're talking about the entire body of Jewish religious laws here, a totally complete system for how to live. If you can ground your identity in this coherent internal world, well, then the distorted mirror of the outside world, it just loses its power. It can't touch you. So who was the master architect of this fortress? Well, that brings us to our first major figure, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik of Brisk. Back in the late 19th century, he basically set out to build a perfect, impenetrable, intellectual world based entirely on Jewish law. And look, this wasn't just some minor adjustment. His own grandson said that his new method for studying the Talmud, which is the central text of Rabbinic Judaism, was as revolutionary as the Copernican revolution. It literally changed the center of their intellectual universe, a total game changer. So how did this Brisker method actually work? Well, it was built on 4 key pillars. First, it was purely conceptual. It wasn't about debating the text. It was about digging down to the abstract legal principles underneath. Second, it was hermetically sealed. No ideas from history, philosophy, or science were allowed in. The system had to be completely pure. Third, and this one is absolutely crucial, it totally rejected the question why. It wasn't interested in the purpose or the ethics of a law, only in defining what it was with laser-like precision. This intense analytical focus was designed to resolve every single contradiction, to create a perfect, flawless system. So what was the ultimate goal of all this? The point was to construct a parallel universe. An intellectual world so logical, so complete, and so self-referential that the chaotic, messy, and often hostile real world, well, it would become totally irrelevant. But what happens to the person who inherits this perfect system and then has to go out and live in the modern world? This brings us to our tragic hero, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, the grandson, the troubled heir to this incredible intellectual fortress. And this is the central question he forces us all to ask, isn't it? What happens when the person who's been formed inside this perfect, sealed-off system has to step outside and engage with 20th century America? Rabbi Soloveitchik's answer came in his famous theory of the 2 atoms. First, you have Adam the First. This is majestic man. He's the guy who lives in the modern utilitarian world. He's trying to find dignity through his career, through technology, through social status. He is the self that's reflected in the mirror of society. But then there's Adam the Second, or covenantal man. He's seeking redemption through faith and submission to God's law. He's the ideal subject of that symbolic fortress we've been talking about. And here is the tragic irony. Rabbi Soloveitchik said that these 2 atoms, they have to live inside the same person, but they are fundamentally in conflict. They don't even speak the same language. And what that means is that the very system that was designed for ultimate protection, the fortress, it becomes a source of profound alienation, of loneliness. It becomes a psychic prison. So this crisis, it created this massive intellectual vacuum, which leads us to our final figure, Rav Shagar, an Israeli thinker who came up with a totally new way forward.
He wasn't trying to perfect the fortress anymore. He was more like a postmodern rebuilder, trying to figure out how to live within the ruins.
Rav Shagar proposed a really radical shift. Remember how the architect of the fortress rejected the question why? Well, Shagar put it right back at the center of everything. He argued that for the modern religious person, the central need isn't for abstract legal formulas, but for mashmaut, for deep, subjective, personal meaning.
And his approach kind of had 3 steps. First, you have to embrace the lock, just admit that the system isn't perfect. Second, you have to create a dialogue. You have to intentionally bring in outside ideas, from psychoanalysis to literature, to find new meaning. And third, you have to learn to live with paradox. Rav Shagar, pretty provocatively, described the modern religious person as a schizophrenic subject, someone who has to hold multiple conflicting truths in a kind of creative tension. So let's just trace this incredible journey one last time. We started with Rabbi Chaim, the architect. His whole project was to create a pure system, and his key question was, what is the law? Then we moved to his heir, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who diagnosed the crisis of that system, leaving us with this lonely man asking, how can I possibly be both? And we ended with Rav Shagar, the rebuilder, who sought personal meaning for a paradoxical subject by asking, what does this mean for me? It's really an arc that takes us from this intense quest for logical perfection all the way to a courageous acceptance of paradox. And that shift, it leaves us with one final universal question. Because this story, in the end, it's about all of us, isn't it? In a world that is constantly bombarding us with mirrors reflecting all these distorted images of who we're supposed to be, how do we build an authentic home for ourselves? Is it through a perfect, sealed-off fortress? Or is it by learning to live meaningfully with all the fragments?